Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you on the second of our sessions focused on Kassak Museum in Budapest, which is our special guest of 2021, Triennále SEFO, which was prepared and talking about some sort of a universe, establishing the universe as a place built on different moments, interests, interactions, ideas. Merce Palsheredi, who currently leads Kassak Museum in Budapest, is going to talk about their permanent exhibition, which is going to be moved and removed this year. And hopefully he's going to show us a virtual guide tour there. I would like to introduce him, at least very briefly, and then I would give him a floor. In the case of any questions, which are very, very welcome, just write them in your chats, and I will read them after the session. So Merce Palsheredi holds MA in Art History from Eötvös Loránd University, where he is currently studying for a PhD. He is currently the head of the department at the Kassak Museum, where he works since 2015. He is a member of the research group Lajos Kassak's Avant-Garde Journals from Interdisciplinary Perspective, 1915-1928, since 2016. His research focuses on Hungarian avant-garde art and the history of Lajos Kassak's magazine Ma today, in Vienna between 1920 and 1925, with special emphasis on its international networks. He has curated exhibitions in Kassak Museum, in the Virág Judit Gallery in Budapest, and the János Pannonius Museum in Pécs. He has also worked on exhibition in the Hungarian National Gallery and the Berlinische Gallery. His works has been published in several academic journals, exhibition catalogs, and multi-author volumes. I think we are all very much interested in not just in Hungarian avant-garde, but avant-garde as such, also because the main aim of this kind of artists or a group or a base was to re-establish the world, make some sort of changes in social as well as aesthetical level. So I would like to give space to Merce to introduce us not just to this kind of a universe, but also to the exhibition which presents it. Merce, it's yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. Once again, I'm very grateful for this invitation, and I would like to thank the organizers in the name of the whole staff of the Kassak Museum. Now I'm going to share my screen, where I'm going to walk you through the permanent exhibition of the Kassak Museum in a virtual form. This is a new development that we have just finished. It's still a beta version. We have some changes, some modifications ahead, but hopefully during the course of the coming months, we will be able to publish it online. And so you can explore the permanent collection of the museum virtually through our website. The Kassak Museum, as we have been talking about it during the last session a few weeks ago with Edith Sasvári, the former director of the museum, is a very small museum located in the Óbuda district of Budapest. It has been open since the 70s, and its original purpose was to serve as a memorial space for Lajos Kassak. The permanent collection of the museum holds the archives and the literary and artistic oeuvre of Lajos Kassak. Most of our pieces are coming from directly the estate of Kassak, which has been acquired by the Hungarian Literary Museum after the death of this important figure of the Hungarian avant-garde in the late 60s. And of course, this form of a memorial museum has changed a lot since the 70s when it was first opened. And we're trying to adapt new methods, new points of view, new sensibilities towards the material that we host in the museum. And we're trying to figure out new ways of presenting our materials with the help of new research, incorporating new research, new methodology, new standpoints into our permanent exhibition. This current show, which serves as a permanent collection of the museum, has been open since 2011, and it has been curated by Edith Sasvári and Judit Csatlós. They were the first of the current staff of the museum, which had a complete renewal in 2010. They decided to approach Kassak's work not through and not solely through the life and work of the artist and poet and writer Kassak, but to focus on his work as an organizer, as an editor, as a person who was in fact a driving force behind Hungarian avant-garde from the 1910s up until his death. So the focus of this exhibition is not on and not exclusively on Kassak, but on the context in which Kassak worked and the context that which he has created for the Hungarian avant-garde during the 1910s, the 1920s, the 1930s. The focus of the exhibition is on magazines, literary and artistic journals that Kassak has published. There are many of these journals throughout his career, and it's incredibly fruitful and interesting to take a look at these journals, either separately, in depth, or to try to establish the connections between these journals and try to reconstruct the process through which these journals were actually created, not as a sole artistic process by Kassak, but as a cooperative effort with the help of several different visual artists, poets, and writers and intellectuals. And in this presentation today, I would like to walk you through these journals, these sections of our exhibition very briefly. And of course, I would like to encourage you to try and go into more depth with the content of these journals, because most of the journals that Kassak has published were not only in Hungarian, but most of these journals had actually international content as well, including German, French, Italian, even English publications inside. And of course, the design and the visual part of these journals were also very important. But first of all, I would like to talk briefly about Kassak himself. And to do this, I have this photo of him from 1916. This was actually, it was taken during the time of his literary debut and during the time when he first started to publish avant-garde journals. You can see that he has a very particular look, and he was very particular about his look, actually. It was taken during the First World War. Of course, Hungary, as a part of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, was very much involved in the First World War. And during this time, most of the intellectuals, the artists of Hungarian modernism were pro-war. However, Kassak was firmly anti-war from the first moment on, and he was never drafted. He actually tried to avoid getting drafted for the First World War several times. And of course, his long hair, which is a typical form of wearing his hair during this period, was also a statement. And as you can see, he's not wearing a white shirt, he's wearing a black silk shirt. This was also a very important statement with his look. It was the typical attire of Russian anarchists during this time. And he adapted this look in 1909 when he traveled to Western Europe by foot. He actually had this very interesting voyage throughout Austria, Germany, Belgium, and then finally he arrived to Paris. And throughout this journey, he met many of the back then exiled Russian anarchists, and he was very interested in this whole movement and this whole ideology. And when he started to appear in Hungary as an artist, as a poet, he started to create his own self-image as this very eccentric bohemian figure who was very different from anyone else during this period in Hungarian modernism. But to trace the origins of Kassak's art, we have to go even more back in time to his childhood and early years. He was born in Érsekújvár, which is now in Slovakia. He was coming from a working class family, and he himself actually, he did not finish high school, but he started to work as a locksmith apprentice. And later on, during his teens, he came to Budapest to work in factories. It was here that he got introduced into the workers' movement, and he started to hear lectures about socialism and read socialist democratic literature. And he was very much involved in the organizational work of the socialist movement during the early 1900s. And once he started to organize a strike, and he got fired from his job, and he was not able to work in any factories anymore because of his socialist points of view. And this is when he had the idea to start writing literature, poems, and he wanted to make his way into this socialist democratic workers movement through cultural work, through writing poems. And to become a poet, he thought that he must visit Paris, which was the capital of art and culture at the turn of the century. But as he was not working and he was coming from a poor family with no education, he had no other chance but to actually walk there. And this story is actually very well documented through his correspondence with his later wife, Jolán Simon, as well as in several of his poems and his autobiography, which he published in the late 1920s. We're actually working on a Hungarian and English version of the reconstruction of this trip to Western Europe, this vagabondage, which is going to be published during the coming month on our website in an electronic version. So I'm really recommending you to look for it, and during the later presentations of this series, we will surely share the link to this book with you, so that you can take a look at this amazing story of Kassak walking to Paris through the course of like 8 months in 1909. When he returned to Hungary, he was already very much committed to working as a poet. He started to publish his own poems in several different journals, literary journals, and socialist democratic journals as well. And by the mid-1910s, he was very much involved in Hungarian literary life. And of course, his first poems were very much tied to the late modernist turn of the century style, which was very dominant in Hungary by that time. But during the 1910s, he started to adopt a new method, a new approach, which he actually thought that it suited the purpose of his work, his content much more. And this style was a mixture of futurism and expressionism. He was actually one of the first poets to adopt this new avant-garde style, but right after his first publications, many others came along. And this is why he decided to start an own journal. And he started the magazine called A Tett, which means the action, in 1915. This was in a very particular political and artistic context in the mid-1910s. It was the First World War going on, and as I have already said, Kassak was very firmly against the war. He was a pacifist. And of course, he started to criticize both the pro-war intellectuals and the pro-war socialist movement, which was also trying to encourage the working class in Hungary, especially in Budapest, to participate in the First World War during this first period of the First World War in 1914 and 1915. And this magazine called The Action, edited by Kassak, was actually the first and only pacifist journal published in Hungary during the period of the First World War. And it was, of course, very much attacked by the pro-war press and pro-war intellectuals on the basis of this anti-militaristic attitude that they adopted. And on the other hand, this journal was very much filled with new avant-garde poems and artworks. And actually, it was a very small but ever-growing movement behind Kassak, which consisted of young workers, young intellectuals who started to write in this new expressionistic, futuristic style, and also started to paint pictures and draw drawings, adopting this new style. But the main cohesive force behind Kassak's movement was never the style. It was always the content. It was always the intended meaning, which was always focused on the working class. It was always focused on social problems, social issues. It was always focused on the critique of the hegemonic or mainstream discourse about politics and about artistic life. So they were an avant-garde movement in two different senses. They were avant-garde in their style, and they were avant-garde in their content or in their intended meaning. Unfortunately, this magazine, The Action, was very short-lived. It was actually banned by the authorities just within 1 year of its first publication. Only 16 issues were published, and then it was banned in Hungary by the authorities on the basis that its content endangered or interfered with the war efforts of the government. But Kassak did not give up, and he continued to publish his journals. This is when we are going to move into the second room of our exhibition, which is devoted to the magazine Ma. This was published right after, sorry, the magazine Ma was published right after the first journal Atet was banned. So the first issue was published in November 1916, just 1 month after the action was banned by the government. And this journal became the longest running Hungarian avant-garde magazine, with 10 volumes published between 1916 and 1925. And actually it is amongst the longest running avant-garde journals in the world, actually. Ma, the title of the magazine, means today. And it's very important to see that the subtitle of the magazine was changed as well, and it's an important change, which was intended for the protection of this whole movement and tells us much about the actual committedness or commitment of Kassak towards preserving this whole movement and providing a forum, providing a platform for these young artists that were gathered around him. The subtitle for the action was a journal for literature, the arts, and politics, while the subtitle of Ma, which was published already during the First World War, was changed to just a journal for literature and the arts. So you can see that they omitted politics on the surface. They were still very much committed to social issues. They were very much committed to political agendas. They were still very much committed to anti-war propaganda or pacifism, but they changed the whole outlook of the magazine, and they changed the whole system of presenting their ideas to make it more subtle so that they could survive and they don't have to close down this journal as well. By this time, Kassak was already in contact with international avant-garde artists. As you can see on the cover of the first issue of Ma, a lino cut by Vincenc Benes, Czech cubist artist, was printed, and also the whole outline, the whole outlook of the magazine was very much similar or inspired by the Berlin-based expressionist magazine Der Sturm, the Storm. This magazine was also anti-war. It published anti-war literature and published anti-war art in Germany during the First World War. And Kassak was very much inspired by the whole style and the whole approach of its editor, Herwart Walden. Ma was very much embedded into the Hungarian system of literature and the arts. And it's very important to see that Kassak was very much committed to include fine artists, visual artists as well into the whole movement. He actually opened up a gallery, which was one room in his apartment in the outskirts of Budapest, but still he was able to create a space where new artists, young avant-garde artists, were able to present their artworks. And therefore, this small gallery, which was run by Kassak, became actually one of the most interesting and most visited hotspots of Hungarian artistic life during the First World War. Here you can see a photo of a presentation of the artworks of János Mattis Deutsch, who was an expressionist painter coming from Transylvania. He was inspired by the artworks of the Blue Rider group in Munich, Der Blaue Reiter, Kandinsky, Franz Marc, and so on. And he actually painted these landscapes, which were very abstract and very colorful. And they made a very important and very strong impact on Hungarian artistic life when they were first exhibited in Budapest in 1917. I would like to show you also a group photo of Kassak and his movement. This is not a picture of all the participants of his group, but still you can see the most important actors in his movement. You can see Kassak in the middle of the photo. On his left side, you can see Jolán Simon, who was his partner and later wife. She was also a worker, a factory worker. They got acquainted in the socialist movement at the turn of the century. And actually, she also left working at a factory because she was also very much committed to Kassak's cause. And she became an actress. She was involved in reciting these poems that Kassak and his fellow artists wrote during this time. And she was also very much involved in the financial organization of this whole movement. So he was a person behind the scenes. She was not a writer, she was not a visual artist, but she was one of the most important organizers of this movement, who was always very much committed to what Kassak was talking about and what Kassak was trying to achieve. And actually, she was also, in a way, a co-editor of these magazines. And it is also recorded in the autobiography of Kassak that she was also very much active in selecting the materials and compiling the issues of the journals. On the right side of Kassak, you can see another young woman. She was Erzsi Újvári, and she was the younger sister of Kassak, who also became an avant-garde poet and who married Sándor Barta on the far right side of this image. And Barta was also a poet. He was first a very adamant critic of Kassak and later became a very prominent member of this whole group. And he became actually a co-editor of Ma. But you can see that they were actually tied together by family as well. And this is also true for Béla Uitz, who's standing on the right side of Erzsi Újvári. He was a painter, and he was the husband of the other sister of Kassak. So he was also a brother-in-law for Kassak. And he was actually the artistic co-editor of Ma, and he was also very much involved in organizing the movement and gathering visual artists for Kassak during this period. And on the far left side of the image, this large, tall man is Sándor Bortnyik, who was another painter coming from Transylvania. And he was actually one of the most influential artists of this whole group. You can see a few of his expressionist lino cuts on the cover of the magazine Ma from 1918, 1919. These artworks were actually very much praised by Hungarian artists and critics during this period, which was the time of the end of the First World War and the time of the revolutions in Hungary. As after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, there was a democratic revolution in 1918, and by March 1919 there was another revolution in Hungary, which was a communist revolution. and the communists took over power from the democratic government, and they formed the Hungarian Soviet Republic, which lasted for around 4 months, from spring to late summer 1919, but which had a very important and very radical impact on the course of Kassak and his whole movement, because they were actually very committed to this cause. Of course, they were socialist, they were progressive thinkers, and they thought that these radical changes in society and politics could very well collide with their ideas. And so they were very active during the time of this socialist republic, this Soviet republic. And when it collapsed and the right-wing government emerged, then they were all persecuted, and they had to flee persecution into Vienna. This was a time when actually most of the Hungarian leftist intellectuals were forced into exile. They were forced to leave the country. It lasted for about 5 years for most of these artists and writers and intellectuals, but they were not allowed to enter into Hungary, because otherwise they would have been persecuted and put into prison. So they actually had to flee. They had to live in exile, but Kassak was never actually committed to settle in Vienna. It was always a temporary settlement. It was a temporary space for him. And so he continued to publish his magazine, Ma, in exile. It was not allowed in Hungary. It was not, they were not able to send the printed issues to Hungary, but still he was talking to Hungarians. He was printing the magazine in Hungarian. He was focusing mostly in the first issues, the first volumes that were published in Vienna. He was focusing on Hungarian politics, on Hungarian issues, and he was actually distributing his magazine within the Hungarian-speaking communities in Austria, in Czechoslovakia, in Romania, in Yugoslavia. So all the countries that became independent after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. But at the same time, Ma and the whole movement changed a lot after the Soviet Republic. Kassak became aware that direct political agendas and political agitation was not possible at that time, that it led to a collusion with politics, that their ideas, their style, their politics was so much different from those of the mainstream socialists and communists. And so he departed from direct agitation. He departed from an activist program, and he started to focus more on a utopistic idea of changing the whole character of the working class, of educating them, of transmitting knowledge and transmitting new ideas. And he was talking about a way to revolutionize the culture of the people and not revolutionize the politics and the whole social fabric. And this was a more subtle approach, and it also collided with new ideas in international avant-garde during this period. If we think about constructivism in Russia, if we think about constructivism in Western Europe, for example, the Style or Bauhaus in Weimar, if we think about Dada in Zurich, in Paris, in Berlin, we can see that many of these avant-garde movements actually tried to break with tradition. They tried to break with their own tradition, pre-war tradition. They tried to start anew and start a new life, start a new ideology on the basis of rebuilding and actually designing a new world around them. And this required a new language as well, which was, instead of expressionism, the voice or the style of geometric abstraction, which allowed Kassak to focus much more on these basic ideas. And it was also in the whole outline of the magazine, the whole outline of the ideas behind the magazine, and the whole outline of the approach of Kassak towards presenting these materials. He actually started to create his own artworks. He called these geometric abstract constructions Képarchitektura, Bildarchitektur in German. It's picture architecture. So he was actually building these pictures, and the idea behind it, he also wrote a manifesto to declare, was to create a new world, to create a new utopistic image for a society which could change its ways, change its life solely through a cultural revolution and not an actual bloody, politically motivated revolution, which was, of course, a failed experience for Kassak and his colleagues. In Vienna, Kassak started to actually focus on an international networks and international networking. In our exhibition, we have a infographics which shows the vast international network of Kassak. As you can see, it was not only Kassak who was focused on creating magazines and publications, transmitting the ideas of avant-garde art, but it was a very common practice throughout Europe and the world. And during the 1920s, Kassak was in contact with most of the important avant-garde artists and avant-garde editors throughout Europe and the whole world, including the USA and even Japan. To cite a few, you can see the magazine of Kurt Schwitters called März. You can see the magazine of Theo van Doesburg and Piet Mondrian, The Style, and also the magazine edited or co-edited by Le Corbusier, which was published in Paris, L'Esprit Nouveau, the new spirit. These magazines were all tied together during the 1920s. They were publishing each other's contents. They were publishing each other's artists. Kassak was publishing all these magazines as advertisements on the back of the issues of Ma, and he also translated many of the poems, many of the manifestos of these artists in Ma during the 1920s. But Ma was about to close down during the late 20s when Kassak returned to Hungary. He was allowed back in Budapest in 1926, and it was the first time since the early 20s that he was able to come back to Budapest. And he was very keen on returning because, as I have said, despite this vast international network, he was always very much focused on talking to a Hungarian audience and talking to Hungarian people in general. And when he returned to Budapest, he started a new magazine, which was called Dokumentum, or Document. And he also started to create actually posters, advertisement, and graphic design based on the ideas of international avant-garde artists, and also and most predominantly the ideas of the Weimar and later Dessau Bauhaus. You can see some of his works here, of which a few were actually used as posters on the streets of Budapest, and also some of those were used as covers for avant-garde books of poems. This magazine Document is very important and very interesting because it actually was focused on documenting contemporary culture in many different aspects. It was not that much focused on avant-garde literature and avant-garde art as Ma was during the Vienna period, but Kassak was focusing on in a more holistic way on the aspects of contemporary culture, including architecture, urban planning, and also social issues once again. For example, they were writing about the working conditions of factory workers and the positive or negative aspects of motorization of the workforce. For example, they were analyzing the ideas of Fordism and Taylorism, which revolutionized factory working processes in Western Europe and in the US. And they were writing about these ideas and how could they integrate these ideas into the Hungarian situation. But unfortunately, there was only 5 issues of the magazine Document in 1926, 1927. Kassak faced the problems that there was actually no basis, no social background for his ideas in Hungary. Of course, I don't want to go into more details, but during the interwar period in Hungary, there was a right-wing government throughout the whole period with more or less radical ideas. And of course, the socialist and social democratic workers' movement was either disintegrated or it was assimilated by this right-wing government. So there was no real opposition that Kassak would have been able to include in his work or talk to during his work. So he closed down this magazine, which was published as a direct integration of his new ideas into the Hungarian social, political, and artistic life. And he started to build up a new movement from the bottom up, which was called the Munka Circle. It means work, Munka, and it was both the title of a new magazine, which he published for 1 decade from 1928 up until the outbreak of the Second World War, and also the name for this movement, the Work Circle, which was formed around Kassak and around his magazine. The magazine itself was even less focused on art and literature. It was mostly dealing with ideas of politics, of ideas of social issues, and it was especially intended for an audience of young workers. Munka was actually a very political magazine during this period. And Kassak was very much involved in the organization and the editorial work of this magazine, but he was also very much involved in the creation of this whole movement around the magazine. For example, we have a very great material of photos taken during the excursions, the trips, the events that Kassak organized during this period. For example, we can see a group of these young workers, young intellectuals on a Sunday going out to the suburbs, to the forest. And as we can see, they are lying around and they are listening to Kassak, who must have been talking about some political and social ideas during this period. And on the other photo that I would like to show you, we have the wife of Kassak, Simon Yolan, who was leading the speaking choir of the magazine. They actually came together in their spare time. They prepared poem recitals and even plays for their audience, who came from the working class and the workers' movement. And they were trying to spread the ideas of both avant-garde thinking, avant-garde culture, and also an opposition idea to the prevailing right-wing government, which was dominant in Hungary during this period. And it was actually a very important movement, a very important hub, which lasted for a decade, just as long as Kassak's Ma lasted from the First World War and up until the mid-1920s. But this circle and this magazine was even more important for young intellectuals because it was very inclusive, it was very open, and actually many of the leading artists, leading intellectuals of Hungary, many of whom have exiled, fled the country before, during, or after the Second World War, they were actually coming from the work circle of Kassak during this period. So Munka as a journal, Munka as a social movement, as a cohesive force of opposition ideas and new ideas, was very important for Kassak and very important for many Hungarian workers and intellectuals during the interwar period. And of course, the Second World War meant a very strong and very tragic break in the career, not only of Kassak, but of many intellectuals, many artists in Hungary. And after the Second World War, even though there was a very brief period of democratic renewal from 1945 up until 48, later on the socialist takeover took place, and Kassak was also marginalized during this period. So during the 1950s, he was actually not published, he was not included in Hungarian cultural life and political life neither, because of his work during the interwar period in Hungary was viewed as a form of collaboration with the system, as he was not fighting against the system, but he was trying to create an alternative society, an alternative culture, where he was able to talk and organize the young workers and educate them. So the last decades of Kassak's life and Kassak's work was very much defined by a form of exclusion from Hungarian artistic life, and also at the same time by a very interesting and very fast inclusion of his works or reintegration of his works into Western European artistic life and artistic canon. Kassak started to paint again, and as you can see, he painted once again in a geometric abstract style, but these works were not small anymore. These were large oil paintings on canvas, and many of these artworks were actually shown and actually sold in Paris and other important Western European galleries where he had solo exhibitions during the last years of his life in the 1960s. At the same time, in Hungary, his abstract visual art was not accepted. It was solely exhibited. And on the other hand, his literature was very slowly, but it was finally once again accepted by the socialist government. And so by the time of his death in 1967, he was actually once again a published author. He had many new novels, new books of poems published in Hungary. And right after his death, his archives, his estate was acquired by the Literary Museum. And within 10 years after his death, his memorial museum was opened. So actually, this whole story of Kassak's artistic and literary work is told through the magazines and the groups and movements that he edited, that he organized, that he was involved with. But of course, this is only a small exhibition, a very concentrated permanent exhibition. And we're trying to expand on those subjects which we are touching in this permanent exhibition through our temporary exhibitions. So generally, we have temporary exhibitions which are in a way connected to the problems raised in this permanent collection. And I think that this exhibition is actually really good in this way to create a good departure point for talking more and more in depth about the ideas behind the avant-garde, the ideas behind the journal, the ideas behind a socially engaged and culturally motivated movement as such that Kassak have created several times throughout his career. We'd like to thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like to give the space and the microphone back to Barbara for discussion.
Thank you very much, Merche. As always, it was absolutely intriguing talk. I like it very much. I also like very much your exhibition or exposition as such, because I think for me as a curator, it's always quite difficult to somehow present visually works which were used for different purposes, right? Journals, you usually read them at home, for example. It's something you have on your lap. So it's just for you and you are reading the literature piece. But on the other hand, in the exposition, it's something final, right? You frame it, you have it on a wall. So my first question, before I go to Lajos Kassak, which is such an amazing person in the end, is how you worked with the exposition. Was that difficult to put it together all and somehow not just present the idea of first half of 20th century, which is really very much about avant-garde and finding new ways to the new world, new societies and so on, and put it together with life of one personality who was leading somehow this party?
Edith and Judith, who were the curators of this exhibition in 2011, they were very lucky in several ways, because the museum has just been renewed. So the space was in a good shape and it was completely empty. So they had the time and they had the space to create something from the ground. And they took the time to look through the whole collection, to read the materials, and to try to to make sense of this material in a way and rearrange it so that it does not talk only about one person, and they don't create a statue or a memorial to this person, but they try to engage in those aspects which are open for interpretation, open for discussion. And I think that this exhibition is really good in creating this discursive space where you can talk about different aspects. You can focus either on Kassak himself, you can focus on the magazines, you can focus on the content, you can focus on visual arts, and still you have all these pieces of the puzzle together to create a coherent narrative. So I think that it is actually really hard to depart from a monographic point of view, because the material itself is very much focused on Kassak, as we have the archives of this person. And on the other hand, it's also very fruitful to try to have a more broader view or a more broader context. And I think that this is an aspect that we should actually try to focus on, and to educate, even to try to look at the materials, to look at the content of a project or an exhibition in a more broader context, and try to reassess the basic questions that lie behind the materials, and not just tell the story, but also ask those questions, and make the visitors also ask those questions which are relevant and important even today.
Yes.
And not just a piece of historical material which has no actual relevance besides its value or historical data.
Yeah, I think this is perfect, because if you like, it doesn't apply just for exposition, but if you'd like to not just incorporate others or be open to public, you can't give all the answers. You have to make a blind spot for someone to look for themselves, I guess. It leads me to another question, because, and I think you've mentioned it many times, the connection between literature and visual culture, I guess, visual arts. And the second part of the second question is, I'm very interested in graphics. And I think this is really golden age for graphics again in 20th century, because of the journals also. You've presented Benesh, which I really would like to thank you because it's lovely work. So it's very nice you've chosen this one. So yeah, could you expand somehow on the relationship between literature and visual culture?
It was very important for Kassak from the first moment on, and I think it was very common in expressionism and even futurism. So turn of the century, modernism and early avant-garde, and these early avant-garde publications, they were very much focused on the integration of visual arts into these book format or magazine format publications. They also they experimented with the technique, they experimented with style, they experimented with different formats. So it was a very interesting period for these ideas of putting visual and textual parts together. For example, Sándor Bortnyky was very, very much interested in creating these kinds of constellations. For example, he made illustrations to the poems of Erzsi Újvári, and shown her. She was the younger sister of Kassak, and she was supposed to publish a book of poems in 1918. So her very early, very suggestive, very expressionistic poems. And Bortnyky actually created these illustrations which were not directly related to the poems, but they were focused on more onto creating the same atmosphere, this very fearful, very depressed atmosphere, which was, of course, predominantly created by the context of the First World War. But unfortunately, this book of poems was not published, but we are working on an exhibition which is going to show the life and the art of Erzsi Újvári and Sándor Barta. And now we are gathering the drawings, the actual drawings by Bortnyk which survived, fortunately, in different museums and private collections. And so we will be able to, in a way, reconstruct this intended book of poems, which were originally intended to focus on this total work of art, or this interference between the visual and the textual parts. But this is just one example, and there are much more and many in the whole story of Kassak's journals. So he was always very keen on to incorporate the visual elements, even before he himself started to experiment with visual arts.
Thank you very much. When we are talking about visual in this current situation, we quite often use it for universal somehow. It seems that we are communicating via pictures or images much easier than via words. I don't think it's true, but on the other hand, idea of universal language is something, again, at least for me, connected with avant-garde and with this kind of journals. Not just because they're really circulated through not just Central Europe, right, the Europe as such, but you know Hubert van der Berg quite well, and we are thinking about and small exhibition actually, but also focused on universal language. So this is again one invitation for you to Olomouc, because it would be very nice to have you on board in this. And we are thinking about Diagonal and its role in the whole system of visual language, or visual system of journals. Mm-hmm. So could you think for yourself, is it possible to think about this kind of communication as universal in some sense, or is it just a metaphor for you?
It's a really hard topic, and it was addressed several times by all these Hungarian and international avant-garde artists. There were times that they were experimenting or interested in creating this common language on different levels. For example, the Esperanto movement was also tied with several strings to the avant-garde. Also, this very basic geometric abstract visual language was developed in a way to make this common ground or this common platform between different languages and different journals. But at the same time, or on the other hand, Kassak was very much focused on the Hungarian language, and he was always talking to a Hungarian audience. He was always translating these poems, these manifestos from different languages into Hungarian. And it was because his main goal was to reach those people in Hungary, those workers, young intellectuals, who were not able to access those materials without this filter, without this help. And I think that this was actually a very conscious and very motivated decision on behalf of Kassak, but he was also interested in creating this step towards the international community, towards creating special issues which were intended for a German or an international audience. He was getting his own poems translated into more broadly spoken languages, German and French. But of course, it's all on the verbal or the textual level. So I think that this aspect of creating a universal visual language was addressed on several levels, but it was never fully developed, at least not on behalf of Kassak. So, but other artists, for example, László Moholy-Nagy and György Kepes, they were all in touch with Kassak or involved with Kassak's several stages of their life, and they were much more interested in this universal aspect of the arts and visuality, and they developed it much further.
Thank you again. Yeah, I think you've mentioned a few times word education and educational purposes and so on. And I think our work is in many levels educational, or the aim is to educate somehow. So can you expand on this a little bit also? What does it mean to educate? Because I feel you have quite a sympathy for Kassak, don't you? In some level, at least, I think you must have, you are interested in his work. But I think we share also some sort of, it's not a fear, but I think it's much more about to be critical or something like that. Because in many levels, it seems quite utopian, I guess. It seems like a utopia to build a new society which is going to be better. So was Kassak himself, how did he feel? Was he really so utopistic, or were he, because he wasn't naive, definitely he wasn't naive. So what do you think about him in this moment?
It's changed several times during his career or during his life. But I think it's an important factor that he was not university educated. He was an autodidactic intellectual and artist, and he was always very keen on learning new skills, new ideas. He was very receptive, he was very open, and it was partly due to this state of being a distant person, or someone who is without a very distinct class or very distinct education. And I think that he was also creating these sometimes realistic, sometimes utopistic, sometimes dystopic, but always educational and always in a way not didactic, but critical ideas to people who were in a way similar to him, or in a way in a situation which was close to his own situation, which was it was not uncommon, at least in Hungary during this period. So I think that he was, of course, not naive. And when we say a utopistic idea, in the case of Kassak, it's never, fully developed. It's never, he was never fully committed to this. It was one approach that he tried, which he incorporated, and it very much collided, for example, with what the Russian constructivists thought about the role of art in society during the early 20s. But of course, it was an idea which was replaced by a more rationalistic, a more technology-oriented, a more architecture-oriented version of this utopia, which was coming from the Bauhaus in the mid-1920s. And I think that Kassak was very open towards these ideas. He was not copying these ideas. He was actually translating and transmitting his ideas to Hungarian groups and artists, and which he was, what his main ideas or core ideas were, and which he was always very committed to, was actually to make art that is relevant in always that context which it is created. So he always changed his style. He always changed the topics that he was talking about. He even changed the techniques that he used. First, he wrote poems. He wrote these agitational, expressionistic poems. Later, during the 1920s and 30s, he wrote novels, which were very realistic. They were not avant-garde in their style, and they were intended to, you know, in a way document, describe, and also in a way make suggestions to these young workers, to these young people. How could they change the situation that they are currently in, or where their relatives or colleagues are in their lives?
Okay, I think I have a last question for you, but also it might be some sort of a starting point for the next lecture. If I understood correctly, you talked about vagabondism and how Kassak traveled through the city and walked through the city. And this kind of flaneurism, when you talk about his realistic experiences and realistic aims in the end, and realism in his artistic choices, I guess, this is something which somehow works for me, because if I imagine him walking through the city and seeing the whole architecture and the system and people in the city and so on, and then there is, well, yeah, it's a vast connection, but on the other hand, you were talking about infographics and maps and this kind of things. It somehow clicks, right? It's again, it leads me to universe somehow. You're in the center in the universe, not center as center, but you are moving from this and making connections and rebuilding the world somehow. So yes, I agree with you. There is no utopia. It's somehow responsibility or something like that towards the world. So yeah, now I would lead you to the conclusion, I guess, and give you a floor to final remarks on this topic.
This is a very interesting topic, actually, and I think that in the lecture that is going to focus on our temporary exhibition series about workers' culture in interwar Hungary and avant-garde magazines on an international scale, with a focus on their social ideas and programs. So in this lecture, we're going to talk more about these ideas and more about how style and content and purpose are matched or mixed together in Kassak's life and Kassak's works. And I think that it's actually a really interesting mixture and a really interesting story, which could be told from very different angles. And I think that this permanent collection also shows. No, I just saw that I was talking for much more than 40 minutes, and I'm sorry for that. But still, you know, it's possible to talk even much more about these topics because it's a very interesting and very rich material. So I would once again like to encourage all the viewers and all those who are still interested in Kassak to visit either the website of the museum in a few weeks, when we're going to have this online virtual version of the exhibition available online, or come to Budapest in the coming months or during the next year and visit this permanent collection in person, because now we know that we are not going to close down this exhibition and not going to change it during the next year, but we will still leave it as it is. And we are going to create temporary exhibition that complement and expand these topics even more for the coming months. So thank you very much for the questions. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'm looking very much forward to seeing you once again for the next topic of this series, which is going to be museum education.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to stress it because I love this. I really love your exposition and I really admire your work. I think it's really specific, and I would love to bring you to Olomouc at least next year, and we'll see how it works then. It might be interesting for the public. We are going to organize a real discussion in Olomouc during November. So please stay in touch, look at us, follow us on all the platforms. I would also like to stress that we are still dealing with quiz, and you can win tickets to Kassak Museum to Budapest whenever you'd like to travel there, and books and much more. So stay with us, stay interested in Kassak's life and in Merce and Edith and others' works there. So thank you. Have a lovely evening. Thank you, Merce. All the best to Budapest, and we will see each other quite soon.
Goodbye. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.